Welcome to the Relational Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today we talk about the significance of Christmas, the Incarnation, and what that means for our relational health. So thanks for listening. Hey, Austin, how are you?
Good. How are you, Wes?
Good. Early December, nice and chilly outside. Christmas is just around the corner, so I'm excited. It's my favorite time of the year.
That's good. Yeah, I'm ready for some snow.
Yeah, I don't mind a little snow. I don't like driving in snow, but I like looking at snow, if that makes sense. So
It does. It does make sense.
well, I want to talk about the season, particularly Christmas, and how it relates to all of life, particularly those folks in recovery, which, as we talk about, all of us are in recovery from something. There's something that's unwanted in our lives that typically becomes habitual to some degree that we struggle with. We all struggle with relationships that aren't perfect and as we want them to be. And I think what Christmas embodies is this idea, in theological terms, we'd call it the Incarnation, where Jesus comes and takes on flesh and dwells amongst us, as John says in the beginning of his gospel in the Bible, in the New Testament. And I think for many folks that deal with chronic unwanted behavior, there is a sense of shame, toxic shame, of being abandoned, of being unlovable. A lot of times, some folks grow up in and around environments that aren't incredibly loving and accepting. That's not everybody, but that's definitely the experience of some. And I think the feeling of like we don't fit in, not accepted, not valuable, not lovable. Really, those kinds of thoughts are the feelings and thoughts of many, and I think it's those thoughts that often lead us to try to mend ourselves, soothe ourselves, and so on. And the beauty about the Incarnation, Jesus coming to earth, is just that event in and of itself really shows how important and valuable human beings really are. Specifically, even all of us on, you and I on this podcast and anyone listening, God sent his Son to make a way for human beings to be in relationship with God. And that started with Jesus coming and taking on flesh. I'll read a couple verses here in John chapter 1. Verse 14 says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we've seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." Verse 6, "There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light," referring to Jesus. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world, and he was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So this is radically significant, that Jesus comes, humbles himself. There's all this talk of Jesus humbling himself throughout the New Testament. What does that mean? That means that God is infinitely incomparable to humanity. He created humanity, and yet Jesus takes on the limitations of humanity, of flesh, the life that you and I experience, takes that on so that he can make a way. He can experience our experiences, but also make a way for us to be in relationship with him and relate to him and him to us and so on. So it's remarkable because it really displays the value of humanity, your value, my value, whoever's listening, their value, that we are made in God's image and God cares about us so deeply. So I just want to talk about that a little bit in the spirit of Christmas, what this season means for us relationally. So those are a couple thoughts off the top of my head. I don't know what's on your mind.
Well, for starters, I think you brought up a handful, like you said, a handful of things at the beginning. I just wanted to clarify where if we're all recovering from something, and that's not to downplay the severity of somebody else's story. It's to see each other as like we are peers walking through a world. We just kind of, our lives look a little different based on the choices or circumstances we find ourselves in. And that level of chaos that comes from those choices leads people to what you said, toxic shame, can lead people to toxic shame. And when we say toxic shame, I think it's important to identify that shame as an emotion or a feeling isn't a bad thing. But when it turns to toxic shame, that's when it gets unhealthy. And kind of defining that and how Jesus's example in coming and living this life gives us the way out of toxic shame. So shame is feelings like there's something in me that's wrong. There's a desire or a need or something that I'm doing that's just like innately off and wrong. Toxic shame is like there's no hope out of that. That's kind of how I try to separate those two. Would you add more clarity to that? Do you feel like we need to add more clarity to that, Wes?
Yeah, I think shame's like I didn't measure up in some way. Guilt is like, more judicial. It's like I was wrong. Shame is more like, man, I am wrong in this, in this situation. Shame is sometimes appropriate when we do shameful things, but toxic shame is like a deeper belief that I am no good.
I am not enough.
I'm not enough, and I will never be enough.
Or I'm too much.
Yeah, it's just the sense that I think at its core, that I'm unlovable, that I'm no good. Where in the garden, God creates humanity and calls it good. I think toxic shame is a rejection of that, and this belief that I am no good.
I think the idea that God this example of Jesus coming to earth, it's a big deal to figure out like the story of Christmas, the story of like when Jesus came and how he came. Because if we were to write the story of Jesus coming to earth, like if we were to say like, how do we make this like, this is a big deal. So how do we, if I were to write the story, I wouldn't have written it the way that it actually happened. Because Jesus came as a baby, the most like dependent, like you have to make sure they don't die. Like when a baby is like, it's very dependent on the people around it. So God came as this dependent child, and then he didn't come into a place or a neighborhood that you would say is safe. He came into a very dangerous like time. Um, it was in Jerusalem. They were occupied by Rome. Like there was no laws. Like they had just killed a whole bunch of babies earlier. A couple, like I don't know how much earlier. So it's like this wasn't a safe place to be a Jewish baby. And then Jesus came. So like God is putting this, he's giving us as an example of somebody to live by. And so the reason why I'm listing all these things is because like God put Jesus where he was on purpose to say he loves us. And he put Jesus in this, like, because Jesus wasn't in this like quote safe area, it's saying it's like, I'm doing this because I'm showing you that you do what you need is me and I want you. It's those two things for me really stand out in the story of Christmas is if God wanted to make everything nice and perfect for Jesus, he would have been born in Rome to an emperor and everything would have been a bit easier, but he wasn't. He was born to unwed teenage parents. And if you met a teenager lately, that's a crazy idea to give a teenager a baby. And it's saying that like, hey, so Jesus had to depend on God for his safety. He had to be in that close relationship with him. And then knowing that God wants to be in a relationship with us. Cause I think we can all identify a relationship in our past where we really wanted to be close to somebody, or we wanted to like date someone and they like rejected us. And it's just like, it's like, you're not a bad person. I just don't want to be in that kind of relationship with you. That hurts. And so knowing that like God isn't that at all, it's like he isn't that person. He's not looking for someone, a better version of you. He's looking for you. Those are the things that stand out to me in the story of Christmas right now, is that he gave us this example of who Jesus is, where Jesus had to depend and put faith in God. And it wasn't like God was like, I'm doing this so you have to feel obligated to come to me. Like I'm the only person that has food and you're hungry. It's like, that's not how, like Jesus is choosing to put his faith in who God is. And God is not doing this as a trap. He's doing it because he loves us and he wants us to be in relationship with us. It's an odd thing when we think about the story we tell ourselves often of I am unvaluable and unlovable, and any feeling of abandonment I deserve. So the story of Christmas is in direct contradiction to that.
Yeah, I mean those stories that we tell ourselves, like the one you just spouted off, are that's the narrative of Satan. I mean that's the narrative of Lucifer. That's the narrative of evil. Um, to kill, right? To destroy, um, to isolate, and I think it's intentional. I think it's very significant that God shows up in the way He does, because to your point, I think at its core, at least one of the takeaways is that yeah, the ways that we tend to judge um, hierarchy, um, God 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 does not value humans in the way we often do. So he comes but in very humble means. I also think it's a way in which God truly displays just this incredible amount of humility and experiencing the suffering of what it means to be in this world. I'm reminded, like I just turned my Bible, like Hebrews 4, 14, it just where the writer of Hebrews says, since then we have a great high priest, right? He's passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession, for we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every way has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. The key there, why I read it, is we don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness. The way that God in Christ is able to sympathize with our weakness is because he took on flesh and he felt it. He felt it. He's not a God that's far off. He's not a God that just lived in a palace. And listen, if God would have done that, he would have done so deservedly so. But what's fascinating is the radical humility that the creator of the universe displays. And I think that shows us much about God's character. And I think God's obviously trying to go to some great lengths to display how valuable his creatures are, how valuable human beings are. And so to him, and so not because of what we've done or how we've performed, but just because we exist, God has chosen to give us value. And that is so important. So when we believe that we're unlovable and we believe that we're no good, that's obviously a narrative that doesn't come from God. That's not a narrative that comes from God.
Yeah. And he uses our story. Like, he's not surprised by our stories. He's not surprised by the lives that we've come from. He doesn't look at our past and was like, I can't believe that happened. I mean, holy cow, that's crazy. I just don't know if we can hang out anymore. Like, he's not surprised. He knows these things. And he's giving us the opportunity to live a more beautiful, true life through the craziness that we live in. There's like an example that comes to mind is there's this old proverb. I can't remember where it's from. It's the tale of the three trees. It's a story of Christ. I don't know. Have you heard this story, Wes? It's talking about like these three trees one of them wants to be they're on a hill looking down at a city. And like it's an example of like, these are the stories we tell ourselves this is what we want for our life. Our life doesn't go the way we plan. And then God has this more beautiful thing of like what it can look like, where we're actually getting the better version of what we wanted, the truer version of what we wanted from the beginning. It's that whole loop. And throughout the story, it's like these trees wanted to be something else, and then they realized they were made for something better and more beautiful than they could have imagined. But it didn't feel that way until Christ entered the picture and changed how we saw our lives. And that's the amazing thing about who Jesus is. When he comes into our lives, he highlights the problems and chaos and pain, not as like this revealing of like, oh, you're just super crappy. He's doing it like out of a like, this is a experience that strengthens you to better care for others, to better love yourself, to give you gifts and experiences, to show true kindness and compassion to people. So the pain it's not like this wasted time. There's a reason for these things. It doesn't make them fun or that you wish them on somebody else, but there's a reason to go through those. The reason on the other side of those stories is to see that like there's a way out of it. There's a hope for my future that often I don't see, and that I'm probably not going to see in the middle of the craziness, in the pain, when things just aren't going well. I'm like, I'm not going to see it. But knowing when Jesus enters the story, it changes how we see our story. It's he shifts he shifts those unhealthy traits that we have, and where we think are like our big weaknesses are actually these gifts that he's given us when we are able to use them in the way that we were actually designed, that we were gifted to. So it's yeah, there's a lot of different ways I could go. I'm just yeah, I can't get through like the story of the three trees is one of my favorite. We read it every Christmas at my house. It's a great story. I can't get through it. It's a great story. But
I'll have to check it out. Yeah, I think my hope here, I mean, it is what you're saying, and I think it's just to remember. It's to encourage us to remember. Um, Christmas is my favorite time of the year, but it's like a lot of things. It's becomes ritualistic to the point, and I like rituals. I think rituals are good. The only problems with rituals and with routines is that we can we can really lose the beauty and mystery and transcendence of these things. They become something much less than. They become, and obviously, especially in America, Christmas has been co-opted and commercialized, and I frankly love all of it, but it's been co-opted and commercialized to the point that I think we forget how much bigger it even is than that. And in the beginning of Matthew's gospel, in chapter 4, verse 16, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, and for those dwelling in the region in the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. So Christmas is like, imagine just a future hopeless. The people of God are in exile, which really is a metaphor for our exile without God. That what we need most is God. Just imagine opening your eyes over the landscape of the largest swath of land you've ever looked at and just seeing nothing but darkness. It would be eerie. It would be scary. It would be hopeless. And just imagine this great beam of light just pouring out over the darkness, which is a sign of hope, a sign of life, a sign of redemption. It's the hero story, and it's the most important hero story in the history of the world. And Christmas, that's what Christmas embodies. That's the meaning of Christmas, that Jesus comes into the darkness. That instead of being far off from your darkness, God comes into our darkness. God dwells amongst our darkness. God's not scared of our darkness. He wants to take the darkness away. And that's good news. And so for anyone listening, I think the reminder is that Christmas, for all the things that it is, the most important thing I hope that we remember at this time is that one of the most significant things that happened in human history is that Jesus came to make a way for us to be made right with God, and he does so in such humble ways, and he comes into our darkness, and that's something that we should be mindful of, because I believe there's a lot of consolation and hope and peace in that truth. Any final thoughts?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, man. That's a good way to wrap it up.
All right, man. Well, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.